This is the shorter version of a video I made explaining my experiences in trying to promote critical thinking and free speech. Now, I've cut this down into different segments, and in this one, I'm explaining why I'm doing what I'm doing, what kind of experiences I've had in trying to promote these ideas. So here you go. Enjoy the shorter version. Most people watching this have probably come here after seeing me with Dr. Jordan Peterson in a couple of videos, the most recent of which was the two of us discussing my dealings with the Ontario Psychological Association, or the OPA, and more specifically their listserv. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to give a bit of a background on my connection with Dr. Peterson. Basically, since November, when I heard about Dr. Peterson's struggles with the University of Toronto, the media, a bunch of trans people, I think it actually started in October. But again, anyone watching this has already heard this backstory, so I'm not going to go into detail. But from my end, what he was talking about, I have seen regularly and consistently in my job as a university instructor. And, you know, what I was doing was both in my classes, talking to my students, and also in the media, in fact, and then also on my podcast and on the OPA listserv, I was highlighting various stories coming out of university mostly, showing that what Dr. Peterson has been talking about, it's not hyperbole. It's not just mad rhetoric. It is happening. And I can't count. I've literally lost count of the number of students who've come to me and they said, we can't talk about certain things in class. If we raise an issue, if we provide a perspective that goes against the professor's or the whole class's ideology, we get in trouble, they say. And one of my students, this drove me crazy. He actually said this. This happened to him. He got in trouble. He was fighting with the professor because he used a term. He said to the professor something along the lines of, that issue is not so black and white. And the professor basically chastised him for using a racist term, black and white. And he said that has nothing to do with racism. He had to fight all the way to, I'm not sure if it was the dean or the chair, but he had to fight them to show them it's not a racist term. But this is the kind of hysteria that's been going on in campuses, whether it's in the United States or in Canada. And I do see this. And, I've given podcasts, which you can check out through DocAmitay's.com, talking about this issue. It's a real issue, and it's really distressing for a lot of my students because they basically have learned, I can't speak my mind. I've got to toe the party line, and I've got to write essays that basically conform to the ideology that my professor holds and that he or she is ramming down my throat. So I stood up against that in my classes. I'm trying to promote in every class of mine for the last 15 years. I've taught 20 courses to tens of thousands of students, 160 plus times, again, 20 different courses, all psychology. And I am really always trying to promote critical thinking because I tell my students, anybody can lecture from a PowerPoint. You can go on Google or YouTube or something and find the same kind of information. But what's really important is to be able to step back, objectively analyze the information and see, does this make sense? Are there inconsistencies? Am I blindly agreeing with something simply because it fits into what I want or need to see with respect to a certain thing, phenomenon, the world at large? And, critical thinking cuts through all that and it looks at the facts and it identifies problems, it finds middle ground, and it appreciates nuance. And all of that seems to be lost, not only in university, but in general discourse, which we see in the media all the time, in podcasts and so on. So I've been talking about that in my classes for many months, and one of my students in one of the classes, Psychological Disorders, she is a big fan of Dr. Peterson's. She's known him for many years, and she told me that she would get him to come to my class to give a guest lecture. I didn't think she could do it. She did. He came in February of 2017. He spoke to my human sexuality class. I invited all of my students and past students as well. And I basically wanted them to be able to hear Dr. Peterson directly. I wanted them to be able to ask him questions. Don't, believe the hype. Don't infer things that he hasn't said. Ask him directly. And so he spoke for almost 2 hours. It was a great turnout, and students asked great questions. And the only regret that I have with that lecture is that, or that guest talk he gave, is that I didn't plan it that well. And so, I thought it's best just to have a Q&A, let him talk to the students. And the way we formatted it, though, we wanted to have it casual. So he and I were sitting at the front. and a friend of mine who was recording the lecture, the way his camera was and the way the lighting was, he didn't want to move it at all, so it was stationary the whole time. It was a freeze frame, and unfortunately, he had the two of us in there, and so Dr. Peterson spoke for about 97% of the time, and so I sat there. As an animated piece of furniture, basically. So that's the only regret. I would have edited myself out, let him have the talk with everybody if I could do it all over. But, a lot of people were commenting on his video, and it hit over 180,000, at least I believe, as I'm doing this video right now. And, they were saying it was a great talk by him because it was free flow. Students asked him questions, nothing was prepared, and he was able to articulate his concerns about a wide variety of issues. And there were certain themes that were present there, and these are the themes that, again, I've been trying to teach to my students, my patients, and my own kids for many years. And it's not like I became a Jordan Peterson fan, and I'm a zealot and I'm adhering to what he's saying. It's not that. The fact is, so much of what Dr. Peterson says aligns with what I believe and with what I teach myself and what I convey to my patients and everyone else. So that's why I'm so strongly promoting what he's been trying to express. And he doesn't need me because, as he said, he's had hundreds and hundreds of media interviews, including a lot of podcasts. He's like the number one sought after guest for good reason. So all I'm doing is lending my voice, and what I was doing specifically, and this goes back to the OPA, was I think actually a colleague of mine started off the whole thread where he mentioned the talk that Dr. Peterson was going to give. It was a debate at the U of T in November. And after he made that announcement, and he also said, isn't this great? A psychologist is in the news. He's garnering a lot of attention. And we as psychologists, we don't do a great job of promoting ourselves. People don't know the difference between a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, a coach, a psychic. So Dr. Peterson has brought more attention to the field, and I think he's brought more positive attention than anyone else has done, or all of us have done combined. And one of my colleagues mentioned that, and he was lauding Dr. Peterson for that. And after he did that, several colleagues jumped in and said, "We don't share your enthusiasm." And they were explaining how they believe that Dr. Peterson was a terrible person. He has terrible views, reprehensible even, and he has hate in his heart. And I mentioned this in the previous video, but these are the kind of things that were being ascribed to him, calling him transphobic, etc. And so when I saw that, I said, "Have you actually watched his videos?" And I said, "I don't agree with what you're saying." I said, I know I would have taken a different approach to dealing with the issue. The first thing I would have done is try to make it a non-trans issue. And as Dr. Peterson has said in numerous videos, including with me, that was just the context in which this all developed. But in reality, the main issue is his concern about the freedom of speech, about fascism, basically, about the thought police telling us what we must say, not what we can't say, but what we must say. And with really poorly conceptualized, constructed and worded legislation that's going to harm many people, and it has, not necessarily this particular issue, but there have been cases in the past where the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal has been used, whether it's Ontario or in Canada, has been used to really punish people for things that most reasonable people would agree is not worthy of the time. And even if they're found innocent, they have to pay for the lawyers, they have to pay for the whole process. So someone with an axe to grind can very easily take someone to these tribunals. And now they won't listen to every single case. They do try to have a triage system and try to figure out what's worthy of pursuing. But if you do look at some of the cases, you would wonder really who is making these decisions, because they don't seem like they are reasonable cases. So in any event, I knew after what I've seen in the media, after doing my own due diligence, I knew that what Dr. Peterson was saying was legitimate. I saw it happening all the time, as I said, in my own classes, where students are terrified of speaking their mind. And they basically have learned to toe the party line. So when they're writing essays or other kinds of materials for their classes, if it's not a multiple choice exam, any other thing by which they're being graded, they have to adhere basically to what the professor is ramming down their throats, even if it's not fact based, even if it's quite obvious the professor's ideology, and even if it's hateful, quite frankly. And people who say, you can't be racist, you can't be sexist if you belong to a marginalized group, well, fine. If that's the definition you want to use, because they're being oppressed and they therefore can't be these kind of ists, that's fine. But at least let's call it hateful. Let's call it bigotry. Let's call it prejudice, because that's what it is. And students are experiencing this. And it's not just students, of course. The things that Dr. Peterson talked about in the lecture, for example, the implicit associations task, which I really wish that I'd been able to bring up the proper PowerPoint, because I do it in my classes and I have the students do it like a simulation, and they see just how ridiculous it really is. I just hadn't planned that properly. I didn't know he was going to be talking about that. But that is being used in companies. More and more people are going to be coming out now, anonymously most likely, because they want to preserve their jobs. But what they're saying is legitimate. These supposed implicit biases are being penalized. They're being used to determine whether somebody gets a promotion, whether they get hired, whether they need retraining. And there's no research to show that this is a legitimate endeavor. So again, knowing all of this, I strongly supported Dr. Peterson. And on the listserv, the problem was that not only were people calling to shut down this debate that happened in November, and as I mentioned in my video with Dr. Peterson, one of these colleagues wrote a piece online. She posted it to the listserv, and the piece, I don't care what her ostensible reason was, the reality is that she said that this debate should not happen, that we should not have these kinds of discussions, even though this phenomenon, trans issues, which I don't say this, there are many phenomena related to this, it's far from unequivocal. We don't, the science isn't in, regardless of what some people will come on TV and say. And one of these people came on, I forget his name, it's not worth thinking about, but he came on onto a TV program that is considered pretty highbrow. It's called The Agenda on TVO in Ontario, Canada. And most people consider that to be a pretty intelligent show. Yet he came on and said basically that there's general consensus among the scientific community that biological sex does not exist. And I've heard other students tell me that they've had professors either say it themselves or have guest lecturers come in and say that's what science has determined. And I don't know what science they're talking about, and I definitely know there's no consensus in that regard. So this is more ideology. So I had a number of colleagues basically taking the same approach, and I simply posted in the listserv my concerns about that, including that example of this guy saying science does not, or biological sex does not exist. And the response was mostly silence. There was some support back channel, mostly by older colleagues who weren't raised in a ridiculous education system. And they told me the support that they were giving me had to be private because they were concerned of some kind of repercussion. And as Dr. Peterson asked me, what kind of repercussion could that be? Well, the listserv does serve as a referral source. So if someone has some kind of issue, depression, marriage counseling, something like that, and one of the psychologists, for whatever reason, can't treat them, they put that out to the listserv. And then people say, hey, I'm available, and they pass their names on. So the reality is a lot of colleagues would get shunned if they spoke their mind. I know I'm being shunned by a lot of my colleagues. Luckily, my practice is busy enough that I don't need their referrals. I don't mind them, but I'm doing fine without them. I'm working over 100 hours a week, doing my clinical work, doing assessments, teaching, and doing other stuff. So, I really don't need that. But the fact that it is happening is a sad indictment of some of my colleagues. And I don't want to tarnish all of my colleagues with the same brush, because not everybody agrees with some of these colleagues, the ones that jumped all over this other colleague and myself when we first started talking about Dr. Peterson. And the same thing has happened over the last 5 or 6 months. I post something like another ridiculous story, whether it was about Dr. Peterson being shut down or shouted down at McMaster, or whether it was about Ryerson students saying that a professor walking out of a room when another person was speaking. Now, it happened to be a woman of color, so they called it, and I got to give them credit, I like the term misogynoir. Okay, so when you're a misogynist against black people, it's misogynoir. Okay, so this was called an act of violence. And the group that was calling it that, not once, not twice, 3 times in a posting that they put out there on, I believe, Facebook, they called it an act of violence, which does a huge disservice to the very many people who've actually experienced real violence. And this is the kind of concern that I'm seeing as well, that this distortion of language is being used to shut people down. It's being used to be able to categorize people into certain groups. It's creating a lot of divisiveness within society. It's an us versus them mentality, when in fact what we should be doing is trying to work together and trying to find common ground and helping everybody. In reality, in Canada, we are so damn fortunate, and Dr. Peterson talked about this in his lecture in my class. We're so damn fortunate that we're all quite privileged in a certain way, and we also all have our deficiencies, handicaps, the biases against us that can hinder us in some way. And my concern that I've been seeing over the last number of years is that that's what's being promoted, this idea of victimization. And I think a lot of the people who are doing this do have good hearts. I think the person that tried to shut down Dr. Peterson, a psychologist, I think in her heart, she really does believe that she is doing good by others. She is trying to help people. She is trying to advocate for those who may be more vulnerable than others. The problem is when you make people feel like they're a victim, when you make people feel that society owes them something, that they don't have to work for it, you are disempowering them. And these are the kind of issues that I was trying to promote on the OPA listserv. And these are what I promote in my classes, to my own kids, to my patients, on my podcast, in the media. I've been doing this for many years. I haven't jumped on any bandwagon. For the past 15 plus years, if not more, this is what I've been promoting whenever I have had a forum to do so. And again, on the OPA listserv, I was saying this. And I was met with, again, either silence, opposition, or back channel support. And a few of the people from the back channel did speak out publicly. Some of them were attacked in response. Others, there was, again, no response from the other side. And even having to say the other side is ridiculous. There should not be any side. We should all be discussing the facts. We should be looking at what reality tells us. What does the science say on all of this? And when I try to say that, that's when I get attacked by people with an ideology. And this is, I think, very important because this is kind of what really blew my mind. I have to be careful about this because I don't want to overstep my bounds. So let's just say that there are some psychologists out there who believe that if someone like me says that when we're dealing with these kinds of issues, we as trained psychologists, we're trained to deal with these issues. We're trained to step back, to analyze, to take a disinterested stance, to be objective and impartial, and to say, what are the facts? What is the science behind this? Where's the evidence? I don't let my emotions override my logic. As a psychologist, I'm not supposed to be able to do that. I'm supposed to be able to not allow that to happen. And when I said that to my colleagues, I've had some colleagues believe that this is arrogant, it's elitist. I've had it called disgusting. And I basically said, should we not expect a basketball player to be able to jump higher than average? Should we not expect a musician to be able to recognize pitch and tone better than the average person? Should we not expect a mathematician to be able to do calculations better than the common folk? So if that's all, I think if every reasonable person would accept that and would say that those kinds of comparisons are not arrogant, elitist, or despicable, then why would we not expect a psychologist to, with our special training, with our years of experience, with our education, why can't we do the same better than common folk, better than lay people, better than the average? And I'm not saying we are better than those people. What I'm saying is we have certain skill sets that enable us to identify and analyze the information better than the average person. And to have colleagues think that that is an offensive statement is mind-blowing. So that's the kind of thing that I was up against on the OPA listserv. And also, every time I posted anything, publicly and privately, I would have a colleague, or many colleagues basically, write to me and challenge what I was saying. But it's easy to challenge something when you completely mischaracterize what I'm saying. And I want to be very clear here because this is not me saying, oh, poor me, I was being attacked. I don't mind being attacked. I've been attacked many times in many capacities. That's not the issue. What I do mind is when words are being misconstrued, when other colleagues come in, they see what's happening, and because they themselves are allowing their personal feelings to override their logic, they're not saying, wait a second, that's not what he said. He's clearly laid out his propositions A, B, and C. You're saying he's saying 1, 2, 7. And that's very different. And very few colleagues actually came out and said that. And again, it's not about, oh, why aren't my colleagues supporting me? I don't care about that. But if you're going to step back and not say that, then you better not come in and do the same thing and think that you're being, let's say, righteous in doing that. And you also better not come in and start saying, hey, people, can't we all just get along? Why don't we aspire to these types of behaviors on the listserv? Now, I've got no problem with that because I think that's proper to do. I think it's important to be able to be civil, courteous, respectful, try to find consensus. That's not a problem. But the last person who said that, A, they put that post out there after the discussion was also already shut down. The president, Dr. Sylvain Roy, had come in and said, look, guys, this is getting too much. Let's shut it down. And I'm saying, here's what I'm saying. Here's what you're saying about what I'm saying. They don't match. And I'm telling you why, you've misconstrued what I've said. Or I say, please show me, where did I say A, B, and C that you're claiming? And no one can ever answer that, because they know, or they should know, that they've completely mischaracterized something I've said. They've distorted it. They've made inferences that no reasonable person or intelligent person would make. So we have to assume that they're doing this either intentionally or their emotions are overriding their logic, as I've said before. So, and when they do this back channel, by the way, because I have a lot of people writing me and saying, why are you doing this? Why do you keep saying the same thing? You're beating the same drum. I'm saying there's a reason for me doing this, because if I don't do this, and I'm not a martyr, I'm not a hero, I just know what's right. And I think everybody would agree that it's right when it's right to stand up to this kind of, quote unquote tyranny, this kind of fascism of ideas where only certain ideologies are acceptable, only certain language is acceptable, and only certain people can say things. And the sad thing is, those same people, because they believe they're on the right side of ideology, some of the stuff they say is pretty reprehensible. Whether it's false, whether it's it's libel, whether it's complete misrepresentation of someone's character and intentions and actions or words, they get away with it because they think that they're being righteous and they're doing, that they're standing up for the vulnerable people. And as I said, they're not only doing these pretty ugly tactics, but they're also disempowering the people that they believe they're helping, because they're making it seem like, don't worry, mommy or daddy is going to come in, we're going to protect you, you don't have to take care of anything, you don't have to be responsible for anything, we will take care of the bad guys for you. And when they bring that kind of attitude to a collective of psychologists, thousands of psychologists, and only 1 to 5 people publicly, myself and a few other people, are standing up and saying, you're going about this the wrong way, you're presenting false information, you're pretending that your personal belief system is reality without any science or facts to back it up. And the fact that only a tiny handful of us are doing that is a concern. Now, from my back channel support, I know that more people behind the scenes agree with what I'm saying. And I think most people would agree that I'm being very reasonable. And before I go further, I do have to stress, and I've said this in the listserv because I've been accused of many things. And as I said to Dr. Peterson, I've been accused of being a misogynist, a bigot, a transphobe, reprehensible, hateful, a few other issues as well. My approach, I think, is one of the best approaches, if not the best approach. It's not my approach. It's the approach that's being tried, that many people are trying to promote all over the world. And for some reason we get opposition because people simply want to identify us as this or this kind of person, put us in this box because that makes life easier. Our brains are wired in such a way that we like to group things. We like to simplify things. We use what's called heuristics. These are mental shortcuts, which are often very wrong. But there's so much information that we're processing. If we can simplify things and just, say, oh, this person is that, so I don't have to listen to him, it makes it much easier than saying, he's saying things that I might not necessarily like, but if I really listen carefully, 92% of what he's saying I actually agree with. I just don't like what he's saying over here because of my personal biases, or maybe because I disagree, or maybe I haven't done my due diligence. But instead of saying it like that, instead of bringing nuance into the picture, they just simply shut that person down. And that's what I experienced. And again, to experience this on Twitter, on the streets, even from students, I kind of get it. I would expect more from students, but I kind of get it. But to have the exact same dynamic with psychologists, that is what concerned me. So thank you for listening to this. I hope this really helps clarify everything with respect to this. And if you do check out DocAmitay.com, you'll see more of what I've done in the media. You see more of what I do as a psychologist, as a university lecturer, as a media consultant. And I will have more videos like this where I discuss other topics in line with what I was doing on my podcast, The Real Reality, which you can check out through my website as well. Thank you.